Well, Happy New Year. In 2021, God has a building project for you to undertake. And I've drawn this thought from a very famous image used by Jesus at the conclusion of a very important part of his teaching ministry, which Christians for many years have called the Sermon on the Mount. It comes in Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5, 6, and 7. And we'll say more about that in just a little while. Here's the reading from Matthew chapter 7, beginning at verse 24, and I'm going to follow it with a parallel reading from 1 Peter chapter 2. First from Matthew 7. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. And then turning to 2 Peter, keeping this building site image, chapter 2 and verse 4. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by people, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house. Well, I hope the year ahead is a good one for you. And I'm just going to share with you now some thoughts arising out of that image of Jesus, of the building of your life being compared to the building of a house, and the need to have the right foundation for the year ahead. In the past behind us, we leave a year which has been full of surprises, difficulties, and challenges. The year ahead we know next to nothing about, and there will be many things over which we have no personal control. But we all have personal control over our own reactions to what happens to us in life and the world in which we live. Jesus says to us that you need to listen and then put into practice. I'm going to share some thoughts about that with you in just a moment. So what I'm suggesting is that Jesus' image of the house builders, one who built on the rock and one who built on the sand, very famous image, is actually him telling us we have a responsibility for building our own character and lives, our own set of reactions to things. There are many things over which we don't have control, and the year 2020 was full of them for all of us. Lots of things over which we had no personal control whatsoever, but which had huge impact on our lives, in some cases hitting our lives like the surge of a flood against a house side. And what Jesus is saying, quite simply, at the end of 3 chapters of teaching, Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is where you can find this group of teachings of Jesus we usually call the Sermon on the Mount. At the end of it, he's saying, what I'm offering you is a foundation for life, but you do the building. I give you the teaching, you do the building, you make the decisions. And the decision you need to make is, are you going to pay attention and put into practice? In which case, you are like somebody building with a foundation on the rock. Or are you going to not really listen, not really put into practice, in which case you are like a person who builds their house on the surface of things instead of on the depth where the rock and the sure foundation can be found. Now, we've just finished a crazy year. 2020 has been a difficult year for many of us, horribly difficult for some. And what we need to do with that, I think, is we need to move on learning the lessons. So when some people say to me, just forget that year, that was awful. And I go, no, let's not forget it. It's got lessons to be learned from it. We can resolve pain, anger, hurt, disappointment, trouble without forgetting, and that is the better thing. Keep the life lessons and go on to build ourselves and our lives on the foundation for the future. So I'm suggesting we see the first few days of January is like the site entrance to the building project that God gives each of us. So I'm giving you life, I'm giving you free will, I'm giving you capacity, and it's up to you now you decide, are you going to dig deep and build your foundations for life and character on the rock, or are you just going to move at the surface of things? And so Jesus says, here's my teaching. You can use it as a foundation for life. And then in our reading from 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter sort of takes the thing the other way round and says, well, the foundation is actually Jesus, and we build a construction of the spiritual temple out of living stones, out of living lives, out of individual people come together to form the living temple. So it's the same kind of construction project image, but it's used very slightly differently. But in the one, Jesus is saying, I'm giving you the teaching that's that foundation, and Peter saying, and Jesus is himself the foundation. Now, I wish I had time to summarize the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew's chapters 5, 6 and 7. You can find that little body of teaching, and it's quite a quick read, but it's really good stuff. In it, Jesus is speaking to people of his time and place who will have recognized that he was taking what they had been taught since they were knee-high to a grasshopper and completely changing it. He was saying, what you have been informed about the scriptures, the old laws of Moses for our people, you've been misinformed. Let me break it open to you, because this is not a sort of set of religious rules to keep you in place like you may feel. This is actually the key to your freedom, your liberation, and your fulfillment. I'd like to break it open for you so that you can found your life on the rock dependably, and the result will be a life that is fulfilling, that leads to a sense of completeness, a character that is developing along effective lines. And then when crisis comes, or even just the end of life comes, and you're reflecting on what you've done with your life, you will have peace, you will have security, your construction will survive the storm that is coming to you. And sure enough, the year 2020 certainly taught us that life is full of storms. So Jesus basically took Bible teaching, which had been used to stifle the human spirit, and broke it open to liberate the human spirit. That's what he's doing. He's saying, I am giving you a foundation, but you are the builder. Nobody else can take responsibility for shaping your reaction to the things, your inner self, and the outworkings of your inner self in practices, in putting it into practice. So the image, if you like, is that you are constructing a foundation on Christ inwardly, but also outwardly in your practice. You put stuff into practice, and your inner and your outer practice, they're one and the same thing. They're totally integrated, and the result will be a secure person, a person whose life is fulfilled and who can find peace in the midst of the storm. I rather like Luke's way of dealing with this piece of teaching, this great image of ourselves as the builders of our lives. I mean, there's plenty of stuff over which you have no control. That's the storm. The stuff just hits you. You have no control over it. What you've had control over is the foundation on which you stand when the storm hits. What you do have control over is who you are becoming. And who you are becoming is settled deep in your soul and out in your practices of following the way of Christ. This is how Luke puts it, and I love the way he says the same thing, but he just, the way he says it just draws out a point that I'd like to make today. So here's Luke in chapter 6 and part of verse 47 and following. I will show you what that person is it's like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He is like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When the flood came, the torrent struck that house but couldn't shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. So what the Luke way of putting it emphasizes is the importance of digging down deep rather than just operating at the surface. So in the year ahead, I think the message is be willing to put in the extra graft, the spade work that digs down deep to find the rock and secure the foundation for your life on the rock. On the surface, there's plenty of material. It's public opinion. It's the expectations of your family and your friends and the people you work with. It's all kinds of influences, and some of them are moving fast, and it's perplexing and confusing, and you'll end up just swept along in that torrent if you don't decide that you're going to put in the spade work, and you're going to be you. And you're going to dig down to the foundation that is Christ. And that is where you will find the liberation to become yourself and to a fulfilling life that is rescued from self-centered focus and from too much emphasis on the expectation and opinions and influences of others. You will found yourself, your practices, your attitudes, your responses to things on the teaching and person of Christ. That's the spade work, the dig deep. The alternative is to not bother to dig deep, but to live on the surface of things, in which case you are without foundation and cannot expect to stay steady when the storm strikes. And if no other storm strikes, we're all going to face the fact sometime that we've now spent our lives, they're coming to an end. And we don't want to spend those moments in regret. We want to spend those moments in satisfaction, in fulfillment, and in peace. So what I want to suggest to you is that to achieve this, to take your responsibility for the construction of your life and character, your soul and your practices, is that you dig deep and you build reliability into those core practices of spiritual life that connect you to the foundation, person to person, with Jesus. Your prayer time, Bible study, however you do that, however you develop your personal walk with Jesus and your participation in your Christian community. Build reliability in it. Don't just go, well, when I feel like it, I'll do it. That's not the way. You don't want a religion that's mere habit, but equally you won't build a dependable, solid spiritual life just going on your impulse and your easy appetite. You'll need to identify what is good for you and do the spade work. It can sometimes be backbreaking. It can sometimes be something you're wishing it was time for a coffee break, but it isn't. It's time to dig, and so you dig, right? And you get yourself on the rock. There's another way that the Bible takes this image, and with it I would finish, because I like to finish with a little bit of a challenge, don't I? So Jesus one time was in conversation with his disciples, and the lead speaker on this occasion was Simon ben Jonah, Jesus' sort of right-hand man, as it were. And Simon had just said to Jesus that, I recognize who you are. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's why I'm following you. I know, I recognize you. And Jesus said to him, do you know what, Simon, son of Jonah, you're impulsive, we notice. He's many things. Simon had loads and loads of weaknesses, but he had this core faith, and he was willing to dig and willing to attach himself firmly to Christ. And Jesus said to him, on this I can build my church. I can build my community of Jesus followers on you. So I'm going to call you, Simon, a new nickname. I'm going to call you Rocky, or Rockman, or Rock. And as we take it from the Greek through the Latin into the English, that comes out as Peter. We're used to thinking of that as a normal name, but it was a nickname for him. It meant he was dependable. And I want to suggest that you become a point of dependability for your Christian community, for your discipleship community. And it can take very straightforward forms. I'd like to finish with telling you about Olive. Olive was the caricature of the little old lady. And she was a volunteer, as Carol and I were, years and years and years ago, in a youth outreach work by a church in a deprived neighbourhood on Tyneside. Olive had no youth work training, as you know, much training in anything, I don't think. And Olive just used to shuffle in, old lady style, sit in a corner and knit. That's what she offered. Actually, the boys didn't know it, because mostly boys who came in, young men who came in to this sort of teens-focused outreach. They didn't know it, but while she was knitting, she was actually praying for them all. What they did learn over time, and it took a while, was that when you needed somebody to talk to, Olive would always listen to you. She would never correct you. She would never criticize you. She'd just listen. And if you ever wanted to talk to her again, she'd remember you and what you talked to her about. And the strongest she would say anything about is, I'm going to pray for you, or something like that. And she was dependable, always there, always in the corner, could always be found, could be depended upon to listen if you wanted somebody to listen to you. And most days, nobody did. She was just always there. Can you be a rock person for your Christian community and in some way in the year ahead? Can you be offering something dependable for others to be working with and working around? And if you can, excellent. And I tell you, Olive would have been the first to say, I don't have any training, I don't have any abilities to speak about. I'm a little old lady on a housing estate. But she was a rock person for Jesus. I'd like to challenge you to be that in your way in the year 2021. Whatever you're going to do, build your house upon the rock, build your life upon Christ, dig down deep, form reliable practices to help you make your life founded firmly on Christ. God bless you and keep you safe, and God keep you fulfilled and growing in Christ in the year ahead. Bye for now.